I'm Sarah Langdon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sarah Langdon with the U.S. Army Medical Research and Development Command, and I am the Army Program Manager for the OTA with MTEC. Today's webinar includes an extraordinary panel with a lot of prior leadership experience at not only our command, but across the various military and medical communities. And so with that, I'm going to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Ken Bertram, who, and I can say this next sentence because I used to work with him, is not only a phenomenal leader, but also someone who is skilled at spearheading change. Dr. Bertram served 25 years on active duty Army as a physician scientist and also leader in the Army Medical Research. This includes Director of the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs Office, Chief of Staff at the Medical Research and Material Command, which is now our Medical Research and Development Command, and Commander of the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. After retiring from active duty, Dr. Bertram served 9 years as an SES and the Principal Assistant for Acquisition, leading Army Medical Product Advanced Development. He retired from federal service in 2018 and is currently the Clinical Product Development Officer at the Wake Forest Institute of Regenerative Medicine, and he is a science advisor to MTEC. He also serves as the Medical Director for the newly created nonprofit Center for Defense Medicine in St. Louis. And with that, Dr. Bertram, I hand it over to you.
Sarah, thank you for the introduction. Welcome to today's MTEC webinar on how to pitch to the Medical Research and Development Command. Today's webinar will include a discussion with 3 distinguished panelists, doctors and colonels, retired, Fraser Glenn, Russ Coleman, and Dr. George Ludwig. The format will be a series of questions to the panel, then a break for questions from you, the audience, that have been submitted via the chat function. We will finish with another round of questions for our panel and then close with time for more questions. I hope you've looked at the slides sent out as part of the webinar invite, as it helps to set the stage for today's discussion. Now let me introduce our panel. Dr. George Ludwig has his PhD in veterinary science from the University of Wisconsin, Madison. He served as a principal investigator in vaccine and diagnostics development at USAMRIID, and during that time served on the front line for such outbreaks as Ebola, West Nile virus, cynomolgus, and Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus. From there, he moved up to the science director position at USAMRIID, and then was selected to be the deputy to the principal assistant for research and technology under Dr. Fraser Glenn. Subsequently, after Fraser retired, George took over as the principal assistant for research and technology and recently retired from federal service. He continues to remain active in support for military medicine as a consultant. Colonel retired Dr. Russ Coleman spent his 28-year military career primarily developing medical products related to the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of naturally occurring and weaponized infectious diseases. That included over 20 years at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, USAMRIID, as well as serving out in Bangkok, Thailand at AFRAMS. His last 8 years on active duty was spent as the commander for the military's medical advanced development organizations, which is USAMDA within MRDC, as well as the director for the Joint Program Management Office for Medical Countermeasure Systems. Russ's PhD is in entomology. Dr. Fraser Glenn earned his PhD in biological psychology, now what would be a degree termed neuroscience, from Rockefeller University. He spent over 40 years contributing to military medicine, ranging everything from an investigator to senior leadership, 30 of that as a uniformed officer in the Army Medical Service Corps, and the last 10 as a member of the SES Corps, and as I've already mentioned, as the Principal Assistant for Research and Technology. Among his accomplishments include having actually helped to set up the acquisition regulations for Army medicine, and to help us get the this designated milestone decision authority as part of the command's responsibilities. And also Fraser was the one who got the other transactions authority for MRDC, which led to establishing MTEC. Fraser is now retired and also continues to support military medicine as a consultant. I forgot to mention that Russ also continues to support military medicine working for TNL Government Services in support of FDA and DoD initiatives. So with that, let's go to our panel and our questions. Fraser, we're going to start with you with a very basic question. Why does the Department of Defense conduct medical research?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Just one correction there. My degree is from Duke University. Rockefeller was the only one with a neuroscience degree at the time I got my degree back in 1974. So why does the DoD conduct medical research? Well, it's because the needs of military medicine are different than civilian healthcare. And there's several focus areas that kind of distinguish the differences. One is the operational environment that the military works in. A second is the focus on preserving fighting strengths. And the third is about some uniqueness of the health threats. And so let's go through those. The operational environment for military medicine is really one in austere conditions, always prepared to operate in places where you don't have the power or the infrastructure or whatever else. There are no fully equipped 2-ton ambulances with fully trained EMTs bringing, 21st century medicine to the point of injury. The weight, the power requirements, and other logistical constraints, size, cube, all of those things vary in austere conditions than they do in normal civilian healthcare. Plus, the capabilities for military medicine are echeloned. They don't call them echelons anymore. I think they call them roles. But the concept is one of echelon, that not every medical capability is present at every point in the echelon of care from point of injury through definitive care to return to duty. And so there are time and distance factors to consider as you go forward. You have a medic at the point of injury who can carry what a human being can carry on his back. And then you have an evacuation chain. And there's some capabilities, medical capabilities that can be actually introduced during evacuation back to initial, used to be called damage control surgery, to sustain survival until the time they can get to a definitive care setting. So consider all of those factors as you're looking at your products going forward. And again, in the future, because of the danger to patient movement, they're focusing on prolonged field care at the point of injury. Even in Afghanistan, which was a built-up theater, the IEDs restricted land evacuation. The other focus was on preserving the fighting strength. That goes back to Joshua Letterman and his general instructions for the Army Medical Department is that fundamentally the role of Army medicine is to keep folks ready to fight and to return them to the fight quickly. As you know, health is the foundation of human performance. And so another priority is to prevention of disease and injury, because whether you're sick or wounded, you're not available to be in the fight. And if you're wounded, the number of folks required to take care of you detracts from the fighting strength of those around you. So preserving the fighting strength through prevention and then trying to rapidly return them to duty, because that's the greatest source of trained, willing, and able manpower, rather than getting folks just out of basic training as replacements. The health threats, as I mentioned, are unique. The chart that you were presented before the meeting kind of gives some examples of the uniqueness of those focuses on the various categories of health threat. But basically, diseases not endemic to the U.S. And caring for polytrauma at levels of severity that are not typical in the U.S. Of course, there are the chemical, biological, and radiological threats that could be really damaging in a military environment. And then the extremes of physical stress and psychological stress of warfighters in contact, whether it is in the Arctic, in the tropic, or at high altitudes in the mountains, or high humidity thermal environments. Those all vary, and the sorts of things soldiers are asked to do in those environments are different. So that kind of gives you an overview.
Thank you, Fraser. George, let's move on to you. So at the moment, what do you see as the current military medical research priorities, given the background that Fraser just gave us?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. As Fraser pointed out, I think it's clear that when you look at priorities for the military, they really overall haven't changed dramatically since we started fighting wars. The idea is to maintain fighting strength, to get soldiers back into the war fight as quickly as possible. But when you start looking at in depth what the current priorities are, a lot of it has to do with context. There's a lot of prioritization variation depending on the stage of development in which a product currently exists. So for instance, advanced developers within the military are interested in immediate solutions to immediate problems. They are constrained oftentimes all the time, by official, well-documented requirement documents. In fact, advanced developers can't actually spend money until appropriate requirements documentation is in place. And again, that requires that products be ready to move into the field relatively quickly, and so are constrained that way in terms of how things are developed. Those requirements are focused largely on current gaps, and then they are prioritized based on a lot of factors, including the stage of development the product is in, the likelihood of success, overall costs, and a variety of other criteria that go into how those are currently prioritized. When you look at things from a science and technology perspective, things are a little bit different. We're interested in, from a science and technology perspective, of what are the future needs of the military. The whole reason you have a science and technology program within the military is to be prepared for an uncertain future. And so we're oftentimes looking at goals and objectives that are much further out than advanced developers would look at. So for instance, when you look at the current environment in which we think we might be fighting future wars against near-peer adversaries, the situation is going to be much different than what we saw in Afghanistan and are currently seeing as we redeploy out of Afghanistan. We're going to be looking at situations where the evacuation chain is much longer, much more difficult to carry out. And so we're going to be looking at extending that golden hour that we work so hard to incorporate into our medical doctrine in the last conflict. How can we keep people alive for much longer periods of time under much more austere conditions? Those are the kinds of things we're going to be looking at. Fraser mentioned psychological health. It's going to be a major problem in the future, looking at how we can keep soldiers, again, from a mental perspective, in the fight in periods where they may not have a garrison environment. They may be separated geographically, from a communications perspective, and lots of other ways from large numbers of soldiers. So again, that is going to continue to be a problem. Physiological health. How can we keep people in shape? How do we have appropriate nutrition? These are the sorts of things I think that are going to be major concerns for the future, and where we would like to see research and development proceed in the future. How can we extend the capabilities of the combat medic? So if it's going to be a long period of time before a wounded soldier can get back to definitive care, how can we allow combat medics to do more, again, with the idea of extending that golden hour and keeping soldiers alive for a much longer period of time. From the standpoint of infectious diseases, I think tropical and subtropical diseases will continue to be a problem. Those diseases, which have been a problem for us for generations, will continue to be malaria, dengue in particular. I think COVID has demonstrated that the military needs to be much more cognizant of emerging infectious diseases, and I think that will ultimately be a focus, along with rapid diagnostics and developmental testing. So again, from the perspective of overall military medical needs, the priorities haven't changed. How do we keep the maximum number of soldiers in the fight? How do we return them quickly to duty if they can't function? Those are from that standpoint, I think they haven't changed. Again, it's looking at the context of the future battlefield that allows us to look more closely at what the real priorities in the near and far term are likely to be.
Okay, thank you, George. Russ, let's go to you. So we've talked so far about priorities and programs. How does the ChemBio program differ, or is it the same, related to what George and Fraser have been talking about?
Yeah, so there's some fundamental differences, and I'll talk about some of these a little further on with some of the follow-on questions. However, from a very practical perspective, it's important for companies who are seeking to work with the government to understand that a number of years ago, Congress was concerned that investments were not being made into weaponized bad stuff. And so medical countermeasures to a biological agent that an enemy might put on a missile or something like that. And to ensure that dollars were spent on these things, they created a law that actually set up separate funding lines. And so there are actually parallel groups responsible for ChemBio defense, to include medical aspects. So if you have a product that you think would be useful for Ebola, you could come to MRDC because Ebola occurs naturally, but you could also go to the Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical and Biological Defense, and they have funding for that. And so there are different groups and different people with slightly different responsibilities that you may want to tap into. And so it's important to look at your product and understand what some of the utilities are and find out where you have to go to get support for it. And I'll leave it at that, Ken, for now.
Okay, so Russ, who are the principal laboratories at MRDC that are in the ChemBio defense space? So those
really
are
two main ones. USAMRIID, the infectious disease laboratory, works on those biological threat agents. And the U.S. Army Institute for Chemical Defense works on those chemical agents.
And how are the medical priorities set for the ChemBio program?
So this is actually an evolving process, but by law, the intelligence community is required to conduct an annual assessment of what our adversaries are doing, what items they are weaponizing. And that assessment will lead to a validation of what the agents are that are being worked on. And then that in turn leads to what we call a threat list. And say, here are the agents that we can legally use our chemical and biological defense dollars to work on. I say by law, but I think it's in a state of flux because there is recognition that these lines between naturally occurring and weaponized are sometimes blurred, and that a too rigid stance isn't really effective in the long run. And so we've seen some loosening of the mindsets, for example, the Joint Program Executive Office and how their dollars could be used in a way that I think will be advantageous to those groups actually developing products that could be used for naturally occurring threats and weaponized threats.
Okay, thank you, Russ. Fraser, summarize for us how people can find funding opportunities and who to talk to.
Well, it requires work on the part of everybody who's interested in getting funding from the announced funding opportunities. And to keep abreast of the opportunities as they arise, don't depend upon, just occasionally going to grants.gov. you need to take a look at all of the DoD websites, review them periodically. You have MRDC's website, which updates with an annual BA every year, broad agency announcement, which covers the various programs. The funding is aligned to the various programs. And so when there's money against the program, funding opportunity announcements can come out, but the BA is always open. And so that's always a good summary of the overall upcoming opportunities and priorities. You can go to the program area pages on the MRDC website. And of course, there's the CDMRP website to get a sense of what the opportunities are and certainly will be. MTEC has its own website. DARPA, ONR, DITRA, I'm sure the JPEO ChemBio program managers all have websites which talk about what their needs are. And from the needs matched to funding, you get opportunities to compete for funding. Now, in terms of the priorities, they're laid out in every funding opportunity announcement as areas of encouragement, focus areas, or other stuff. It may look like a very broad announcement to you to begin with, but the actual funding decisions will be based on what you see in the focus areas or the areas of encouragement. The best you can match to those, the better your opportunity is to get approved. Now, one thing I've discovered that I didn't know when I was working inside the government fence is all of those forms which we generated to get money in the president's budget aligned to medical, they're called R forms and stuff, actually are available to the public. They're on a DoD website at the time that the president's budget is submitted to Congress. And if you look at those, you will see some things in a richness of what the intramural labs are doing, what each program area is doing in a set of documents that is very different in format, what you're used to. I can provide the web link. I provided it earlier, but we can certainly send it out to those who are interested. It's on the comptroller.defense.gov website. And it will be probably a subject of another webinar to go through how to read all of that. But it not only shows the funding allotted to the priorities last year, current year, what the budget year is, but outgoing year, so you can see where the government is placing its money against the various programs. Now, as I mentioned, programs and funding are aligned, and they're aligned and executed through program management chains. So you have a program area, and in the military, MRDC has program area directors. And for the Defense Health Program funds that are being managed by MRDC, there's a joint program committee chair. They're really pretty much the same thing. Within those program offices at Fort Detrick, which are staffed by many different services and uniform and civilian, those program offices, there are portfolio managers. And then below that, sometimes at the laboratories, are capability area managers. And so if you're going to identify a point of contact that you want to get to personally, look on those web pages I talked about, try to identify that line of the program. In which program do the needs reside? And, we can check the funding for that. So that's a good place to look on identifying how the POCs are, who they might be.
Okay. So Fraser, now you've sort of given us some ideas about where to look for things, and we'll assume that they found the right person. George, from your standpoint, what's the most important consideration for someone who's trying to make a pitch, for example, to one of the program managers that Fraser talked about?
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. So I think the number one issue that I experienced in my years as a program administrator was the lack of understanding oftentimes on the part of those individuals doing the pitch of what really the military medical problem was that they were trying to solve. We oftentimes found that there was a product in search of a solution when the real answer is understanding what the need is, what needs to be solved, and then how can your product actually meet that end state. We want to see how that product can actually meet a military need. I think we also have to be able to understand how this particular product can serve both a military need and a civilian need. And I say that because with very rare exceptions, and often in the chem bio world, a military purchase of a given product will not sustain that product by itself. It's going to require both a civilian and a military market for the long-term sustainment of a product. It's just the military doesn't have the resources nor the needs for continuous use of a product over many years. And so a dual use of a product, I think, is another important consideration in trying to pitch a product. I think lastly, the big thing that I think about is that for most things, we already have some sort of a solution that we're already using or plan on using in the near future. So how does your product represent a significant improvement over what might already exist? Or what completely unfilled gap does your product fill? So I think those, from my perspective, those are kind of the big three things that I think people should consider when they're getting ready to pitch to the DoD on their particular product or interest area.
Okay, thank you, George. Russ, anything you want to add from your standpoint as an advanced developer?
So just building upon that, I spent the last 5 years in industry as a business development executive, having capabilities, technologies we're developing, and trying to find the right partner in the government to work with. It's not easy. But too often what I have observed, as you said, I think, you've got a round peg and you're trying to put it into a square hole. And so I see people coming in and talking to the government with, here's our wonderful solution, without fully understanding what the DoD needs. And you can spend a lot of time and money writing proposals and not getting funded with that approach. What I like to do, and I believe has worked successfully, is one, the DoD has needs, and I use this as a simple hand gesture, and my company has capabilities. I like to use my first meeting to determine how good alignment is there. And that's really important to understand both what does the DoD need, but how does that mesh with my company's business goals and objectives? Is this something we really want to get into? And so for initial meeting, I tend to spend about 75% of my time listening to make sure I truly understand, but putting enough out there so the government really believes that I have enough to offer. And if I'm successful with that initial meeting, my goal is to have an in-depth follow-on meeting where I can get the smart people together who can really dig into this to see whether there truly is a solution that we have that will meet the DoD's needs.
Okay, thank you, Russ. So Fraser, one of the elements, even if you've got an idea that fits into solving a problem, as George has emphasized, stage of development is critical. How do you describe your product and its development from the standpoint of you're presenting to DoD? What key elements do you need to discuss with them?
I just like to, kick the podium here on the comments that George and Russ made. The two key areas are discussing the problem and goal, and then the pathway, developmental pathway, and your milestones. You're way ahead. And in your initial discussions, you need to work to achieve that synchrony between your solution and a military problem and to understand it. And if it looks like there's not a match, then ask for a referral. You're talking to the wrong person. There may be another military problem that your product could solve. And be sure to address the military utility and say where you are when you're talking to them. Say where you are on your maturity development. You're developing a product typically to get FDA approval that may have some military use. Where are you in that process? And that's described, the language used to describe that maturity is in something called technology readiness levels. And there's a definition of the biomedical technology readiness levels on the MTEC website. And I encourage everybody to do that. I mean, MTEC is really restricted to funding, I think, down to TRL3, but most of it's translational is technology readiness levels 5, 6, and 7 is the sweet spot. So where are you on that technology maturity map? Know where you are. Tell them what you're going to do next. Lay out your pathway. What is your next challenge? What is your ask of DoD to help you in maturing your technology to the point that it becomes available for use? Now, you need to describe it as best you can, but it depends on where you are in maturity level and for what you can tell them about where you're, what will be next, because research will tell you where you actually are. The data will inform you of whether or not your pathway is going to be one that is successful. So you have to indicate you're going to follow the data, but you shouldn't ignore the fact that I've got a device. This is the regulatory pathway I'm going to be on as a device. And these are the steps I need to get FDA approval, which is predicate to DoD procurement. So you don't have to know everything, completely describe your developmental pathway all the way through FDA approval and whatever else, but you have to demonstrate that you know there's a pathway and you're building the team and stuff to be able to address that. On the commercial market sides, as you're looking at, all those commercial factors, not just size, but who are the competitors? What's the standard of care? Can you compete in that marketplace and things? Those are things you need to know that exist. And if you're very early in maturation, indicate you're starting to evaluate them. The closer you get to the goal line, full technology maturation, the more you will need to show.
Okay, thank you, Fraser. Russ, North Chem Bio program's got some different elements to it. Anything else you want to emphasize in terms of demonstrating developmental pathway?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. First of all, when something is weaponized, we know it may happen somewhere, somehow, sometime, but really unpredictable. What agent is going to be used, what level of individual will be affected. It's really daunting. So you're making products that you hope will never be used. And then these agents are oftentimes transmitted in a different way. For example, Ebola might be transmitted patient to patient through blood. However, when weaponized, it's aerosolized. And so you have regulatory challenges that you would not find with more normal transmission modes. And so the FDA has authorized what is known as the animal rule specifically to address this, where you can develop animal models that replicate what would happen to a human with a weaponized threat. These are not to be trivialized. These are daunting challenges and really require careful and close coordination with the FDA to establish not only the models, but then what sort of studies will be carried out. So it's not a lesser hurdle, it's actually a higher hurdle. And you still have to conduct clinical trials to show the safety of your product. So both clinical and these animal rule trials are required.
Okay, thank you. So Rick, at this time, I'm going to ask, are there any questions that, based upon the discussion so far, we should answer now?
Yeah, I think there were a couple based on, arranging that first meeting or actually accessing MRDC program managers or other folks in the military. And so how, I guess some of the questions are centered on how best to reach those folks to arrange that meeting and do it within the bounds of, the challenges around the FAR where they cite, they can't have these conversations due to, potentially providing an unfair advantage.
George, you want to take that one?
Sure, Ken. I'm glad to start off anyway. So there really is no restriction in the FAR from having discussions with government leadership to discuss what the needs and priorities are. More in-depth discussions can sometimes be a problem if there are specific questions about program announcements and those sorts of things, because that information has to be given to everyone equally. But to understand what the problems are, what the needs are of the military, there should be no restriction in the FAR from having those types of discussions. And in fact, certainly during my leadership time at MRMC at the time, I encouraged people to meet with prospective people that were interested in doing business with the government to have those types of discussion. What are our needs? What are our requirements? And even going into detail about what those needs and requirements are. Again, specific issues regarding program announcements and things like that, that's a different story. But the broad discussion of understanding requirements should be possible with anybody within the DoD.
Okay, so clearly a trick to that is, while there is no FAR restrictions, we all know contracting tends to get the proverbial heebie-jeebies when we start talking to people. And I think that does highlight the meetings like MHSRS, Special Operations Medical Association meetings, when they have product days at MRDC, those are opportunities also. Russ, anything you want to add to kind of round that out?
The best response I had from someone in the government when I wanted to talk was, ask away. Some things I legally cannot tell you. However, I will tell you exactly the same thing that I would tell anyone else. So not giving an unfair advantage, but that opportunity to talk. And that was refreshing. But as we all know, different people have different perspectives. So you may run into someone totally unwilling to talk, and there's little you can do about that, to the other extreme where great willingness. So it behooves each of you who want to work with the DoD to try to talk to probably multiple people about your product and technology and to glean information that would be useful.
Okay, sounds good.
I have another one really quickly if we want to address it, Ken. Goes back to the areas of interest and requirements. There was a question about roles of care and some of the capabilities and technologies that are required at each role of care. Not a term I'm very familiar with. I didn't know if you want to make a comment on that, and maybe that helps the membership understand a little bit better what some requirements for the military could be.
Rick, I don't really think we've got time to go into that one in enough depth to make much of a difference.
Yeah, okay.
We can figure out some way to address that later, but I mean, we would literally spend the rest of the time dealing with that question.
Understood. Okay.
George, you mentioned earlier about making sure that you covered the civilian market. Any particular additional comments you want to make about that?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. We very often would talk to individuals that had really not given good thought to a marketing plan for their products. They would come forward with a great idea, thinking that they were going to sustain their business model on DoD purchases alone. And I think we just need to be realistic in terms of helping people to understand that depending on the current geopolitical state and how the DoD is engaging geopolitically, the needs of the military in terms of its medical products is going to vary significantly. In fact, in some cases, it may be many, many years between major purchases. And so in order to facilitate meeting the military need, we have worked very closely with industry to help them identify what particular civilian markets might be out there to help sustain that business model so that the military can ultimately benefit. I think one of the areas where we've been most successful at that is in the combat casualty care arena, where product development and working with the civilian sector in terms of trauma care have gone hand in hand. And a lot of that is due to the fact that we've had trauma surgeons, military trauma surgeons that have gone on to work in the civilian sector after they retired, that have taken that knowledge, taken those individual friends and colleagues along with them, and so have translated capabilities that we've developed in the military for the civilian market. And so that those markets have become sustainable then because of civilian trauma as well. And we see the same thing in certain other areas. But again, I think that's a critical area where understanding what that civilian marketplace is likely to be and to work with the military to help build those civilian marketplaces, I think is critical ultimately to meet the military need.
Russ, you already mentioned that, from the Chem Bio standpoint, that certain things are developed with the hope of never having to be used. So how does the Chem Bio program incentivize companies to work in that space?
Well, there are a couple of different ways. One, there's a OTA consortium similar to the MTEC called the MCDC, the Medical Sovereignty Defense Consortium. And that's been, equally as effective as the MTEC at helping industry find the right partners, make it easier to work with the government. There's also something called priority review vouchers. Now, some of these are available for neglected tropical diseases, but Congress, working through the FDA, created a special program that focuses on weaponized chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear agents, so that if you successfully develop and get FDA approval of your product for some of these specific needs, you'll get this priority voucher that you can then sell. So it has tangible value. You can sell it to another company that would like a expedited review for their big blockbuster. My last review, these vouchers had sold from between $65 and $350 million. So particularly for a small company, that's a pretty nice incentive to play in that particular space.
So the PRVs, the review vouchers, are too complicated for us to really go into here. But again, it is, as Russ said, it's a major opportunity sometimes for companies to be in that Chem Bio space. So Fraser, you've seen lots of companies come forward with developmental plans and great science. But when you look at the company team or the investigation team, what are some of the things that you're looking for on that team to give you confidence that, yeah, it's not just a great idea, but they're actually going to get to a product?
All right. Whenever you approach somebody in the government and trying to assess the likelihood that they are interested enough to fund, know that the person wearing the government hat is going to be looking at you, asking a very simple question about, you will express, this is my next step on my roadmap. The step may be a milestone or a goal or something you want funding for. And they're going to look at you and say, is there a strong likelihood that this person or this team, using the techniques and with the amount of funding requested and available infrastructure and facility resources, can actually attain those goals and whatever else. So you have to describe your team and its capabilities to inspire confidence that you can actually be successful. Now, the degree at which you have to engender confidence across the full spectrum of expertise and capabilities that are needed to finally develop a product will vary by where you are in your maturity level. Certainly, you won't need a GMP plant manufacturer in a facility at the time that you were doing preclinical and before proof of concept level maturity, but you're going on. I think you can see that. It's important that you generate that trust. And there's one way that I want to kick the podium here for everybody. The way to not inspire confidence is to try to indicate that a mismatch between a team capability, experience, and capability, and the challenge and requirements of the milestone tasks. If you have somebody who has only been a university investigator and coming up and indicating that in the next step, they're going into clinical trials, right? And they have no experience and nobody on their team with that experience and stuff, that is a red flag, right? So avoid doing that. Know where you're going and know what capabilities and expertise you have to show the government that you can actually get to where you're going.
Yeah, I think as Fraser points out, one of the things that we discovered at CDMRP long ago was we would get this distinguished university faculty member, surgeon, busy clinical schedule, has a lab, but also says he's going to run the clinical trial himself and be the CEO. Recipes for disaster. So you've got to build the right team. George, you talked earlier about you've got a product. Generally speaking, I mean, the military's probably already got a product in the space, and you're bringing something that you're claiming is novel. What are some of the things that you should think about in terms of as you present your product to help distinguish it from whatever is currently out there?
Yeah, good question, Ken. I think understanding your competitive marketplace is critical when pitching to the DoD. You can bet that for a given problem, the DoD leadership, the decision makers, they've heard multiple different approaches to solving that problem. Pretty rare exception where we get somebody coming in that's going to solve a problem that's they are totally unique to. So understanding who else is in that space, I think, is critical, and being able to help the DoD leadership understand how your particular product may be lighter. Being able to carry less on the battlefield is critical. So how is it lighter? How is it cheaper? How is it faster? How is it simpler to use? How can a medic who may not have any advanced training beyond what they got in advanced training in the military, how can they use that product and make it useful? What are the logistical requirements? Is it less than what's out there in the marketplace currently or being developed by others? How long of a time between breakdowns if it's a device that is prone to breakdown? How much faster can you get it to the marketplace? And again, another critical component for getting priority within the DoD. Is it more simple? Is it more effective? Is it more specific? Those are all the kinds of things that you want to be able to, again, understand the competitive marketplace. What is everyone else actually doing? And then how is your product better? I think it's critical to really understand that.
So we're actually getting a little bit out of time. I do want to leave some time for questions. So I'm going to hone us in sort of at that very end point. Russ, you've met with somebody, there's been a discussion. They want to leave you with something, a one-pager. What are some of the critical elements that you would want to see on that one-pager to basically help you, take that idea forward to others?
Yeah, I mean, I want to have a warm, fuzzy feeling that you truly understand what we, the DoD, is trying to accomplish, what we need, what that critical gap is. And then I want to see enough evidence that you understand what it's going to take to deliver that. What are the steps? What are the milestones? What are the risks that are going to stand in the way of you successfully developing that? If you can give me that, where my confidence level gets up, I will likely want to have some follow-on discussions with you. As I said before, that's really my objective when attending a meeting like MHSRS. Not that point in time right there, but leading to more in-depth, so we can truly see that we've got a winning solution here that both sides see the value of.
George, anything you want to round out? For example, if you ran into somebody and you had the proverbial 3-minute pitch, what's the 3 things they've got to hit?
Yeah, so I think Russ hit on them pretty well. You know, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What's your proposed solution, and how's it better than the current state of the art? The other thing that's nice to know is, do you have partnership with one of the DoD laboratories? I think having that sort of partnership and collaborative arrangement is critically important in the long run.
Okay. So Fraser, we started with you, and we're gonna close this out to go to questions with one last question to you. And that is, you know, we mentioned that part of your legacy was getting the other transactions authority, which led to MTEC. But I've had a lot of folks come up to me and say, well, you know, I'm going to go after this funding from MTEC. I think there's a lot of confusion about what's the financial relationship between DoD and MTEC. So would you kindly give people some additional insights into that?
I certainly can speak to the intent. Of course, the execution of the details varied after I retired, but MTEC is not the government. And I find many members and stuff confuse MTEC and decisions on MTEC funding proposals as being MTEC decisions. No, MTEC is a way of doing business for the government. It is a procurement tool that can be used. The actual programmatic priorities and the funding and even final decisions on funding projects and stuff are made by the same people who sit behind the same fence that the CDMRP and other funding announcements do. It's government. It's just that the MTEC was created to provide a marketplace primarily for events like this, to share insights and face-to-face meetings that can occur outside of some of the strictures of the BA. As you heard before, or the FAR, as you heard before, there are certain folks that it's not illegal to talk to you, but many government folks are brought up and says, oh, you can't give any details about funding announcements, and they then spread that to everything. It can't give you any details, period. Well, specifically, the authority under which the MTEC was established allows those sort of discussions. The military can present you a problem. You can engage with the military, not only with yourself, but with groups of people to come up with ways to solve a military problem without having to go through they put something out in a funding announcement and you guess what the words mean and you apply for it and you get awarded it or not. And to my perspective, that's something the MTEC is building towards, is providing more of those forums for folks to involve in problem solving of military problems and to inform the military about what they should be asking for, as well as just another mechanism of applying for those funds.
Great. So I want to thank Fraser, George, and Russ. And Rick, at this point, we'll turn it over to you for questions and then close out from the MTEC staff.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks. There are a couple of questions about the influence that MRDC moving under DHA may have. I don't know if you want to make just a few comments about that for the group.
Anyone want to take that one? Anybody got a crystal ball?
No. And as a matter of fact, I've talked to some folks recently at Fort Detrick, at the lower levels at Fort Detrick, portfolio managers and other stuff. They have no clue of what's going on.
Yeah, I would say that you got it right, Ken. It's a crystal ball sort of question. I think we all kind of wonder what the future is going to hold when we move over to DHA. We'll just have to wait and see.
I will say one of my concerns, and I think this is, you know, borne out actually by Secretary of the Army and Chief of Staff of the Army, is the concern is whether or not service-specific research gets diluted. And I think that's going to be a task that the DHA staff is going to have to stay up on. You know, not all problems are created equal. For the Marines and the Army, you know, ground combat has a set of risks that are different than the aviators. So I think that's going to be one of the things DHA is going to have to figure out is how do they parse out priorities, et cetera. But again, in terms of how it's going to happen, I have no idea. Rick, what else?
All right. Well, I think that's it. I want to save a last couple minutes for some announcements for MTEC. So Russ, George, Fraser, Ken, Sarah, thank you very much. We really appreciate you getting together for the membership to talk about this. This next slide is an example slide that was sent to the group. We will follow up with emails to all registrants with this slide deck, and also with a deck that we put together, about 10 slides, how to pitch to the military, and what basically covering the content that was discussed today. So look for that in your emails soon. I wanted to take a brief moment to announce the creation of MCORE. I think we've talked about this a couple of times with the membership, but we're putting together this innovation network of subject matter experts and service providers to help our membership in all aspects of technology and commercial development of their products. The partnership's growing. We've got Alira Health now, Capital Edge Consulting, Grant Engine is on the front end helping to write proposals. Greenlight Guru is working with quality management systems, and we'll be doing a webinar that I'll show in a sec here on our list. Proxima Clinical is CRO with excellent experience in regulatory product development. Smart Health Catalyzer is helping some of our early stage startups with their business plans and helping them pitch to private equity and to the military. And then, in the list of a couple others. So as this grows, we really hope that members are able to take advantage of this. And we do welcome any members who are service providers to join the MCORE. We do a bit of a background check and check references and make sure we can take full advantage of your services for the membership. Next slide, Madison. I wanted to also mention GovMates, ATI, the Advanced Technology International Group, the consortium manager for MTEC, has partnered with GovMates, which is an online matchmaking system to really help non-defense contractors and small businesses increase their visibility for teaming and procurement for military opportunity, or excuse me, for government opportunities in general, but definitely for military opportunities. And they help find resources for a list of items you see down there below. They're less technical than our MCORE is going to be. So you're looking more in terms of things like corporate insurance, proposal support, M&A, investment banking. But there'll be a webinar September 1st at 1 p.m. where GovMates will go over this, and it's a free service to the members. You just create a profile at govmates.com. Next slide. It's not coming up on me. Oh, we got a pretty busy webinar season coming up in the fall here. I mentioned the GovMates webinar in September. We're also going to have Dave Uffer from Alira Health talk about pricing and reimbursement strategies, which is one of the most critical needs for investors to understand for your product. That'll be September 15th. I mentioned Greenlight Guru as part of our MCORE showcase. They'll be talking about quality management systems and how their systems work very well for medical product development, medical device product development. And then we're going to have a Federal Lab showcase. Doran Carranza is the Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships and Innovation at the Office of Science and Engineering Labs with the FDA. He's going to talk about their capabilities and their interesting collaborations with the membership. So be pretty busy, but very effective, I think, and hoping that a lot of us can join these webinars. So with that, again, I thank our moderator, Ken, and panelists, and Sarah, and we really do appreciate your time on this. And we will follow up, as I mentioned, with the email for the slide deck and everything. Thank you very much.